The old man's hand on the glass door left no fingerprint, just the ghost of warmth fading into the Minneapolis cold. Staff Sergeant Tyler Brennan looked up from his desk and felt his jaw tighten. Not another one. The shelters were full again, which meant every storefront downtown became a target for the desperate and the broken. He was already moving before the door fully opened, his voice carrying that particular tone reserved for problems he intended to solve quickly. "Sir, this is a United States Army recruiting station, not a warming center." The old man stood motionless just inside the threshold. Snow clung to his shoulders and melted in slow rivulets down the faded fabric of a field jacket, so worn the patches had become suggestions rather than statements. His boots were wrapped in plastic bags held together with rubber bands, a pitiful defense against the killing cold outside. But his hands hung perfectly still at his sides, fingers slightly curled, relaxed in a way that seemed practiced rather than natural. "I understand, Sergeant." The old man's voice was quiet, hoarse from disuse or cold or both. "I was only hoping to sit for a few minutes, until the worst of the storm passes." Brennan positioned himself between the old man and the waiting area where two potential recruits sat watching the exchange. A young man barely out of high school and a woman in her early 20s, both here for their scheduled appointments. Both witnessing this interruption that threatened to derail Brennan's carefully managed morning. "The worst of the storm," Brennan repeated, letting contempt sharpen every syllable, "could last another 6 hours according to the Weather Service." "You planning to camp out here that long?" The old man said nothing. His eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in the recruitment posters with their gleaming equipment and confident soldiers, the digital displays cycling through career opportunities, the flags flanking the main desk. Then his gaze settled on the wall of portraits. Generals and admirals, distinguished leaders whose faces watched over the station like patron saints of military excellence. Something flickered in the old man's expression, so brief it might have been imagined. His attention lingered on one portrait in particular, a woman in army dress uniform with 3 stars on her shoulders and a chest full of ribbons. Lieutenant General Patricia Okafor, Commanding General of Army Recruiting Command. "Hey," Brennan snapped his fingers. "Eyes on me when I'm talking to you." The old man turned back to face him. No defiance in his posture. No anger. Just a patient stillness that made Brennan inexplicably uncomfortable. "My apologies, Sergeant." Private First Class Marcus Webb looked up from his administrative work at the back desk. He was 19, 3 weeks out of basic training, assigned to the recruiting station for his first duty assignment. The scene unfolding before him felt wrong in ways he could not articulate. "Sergeant Brennan," Marcus said carefully, "maybe we could just let him sit in the back for a little while. It is -15 out there with wind chill." Brennan turned, and the look he gave Marcus could have frozen the coffee in his cup. "Did I ask for your input, Private?" "No, Sergeant." "Then keep your opinions to yourself and finish those intake forms." Marcus dropped his eyes back to his computer, but his fingers had stopped moving over the keyboard. The old man watched this exchange without expression. When Brennan turned back to him, he spoke again in that same quiet voice. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I have no alcohol, no drugs. I will not speak to anyone or disturb your work. I just need to sit down for a few minutes, and I just need you to leave." Brennan stepped closer, using his height advantage. "Look, I get it. You found an army jacket at Goodwill and figured military charity would get you through the door. But this is a professional environment. I have appointments. I have standards to maintain. If you are watching this from anywhere in the world, wherever you are joining us from today, consider this. In every community, in every city and small town, there are quiet figures that most people walk past without a second glance. The old man at the bus stop, the woman sleeping in the library, the veteran whose service has faded from memory along with his place in society. Before you decide what someone is worth based on what they look like, remember that you might be looking at a legend. You might be looking at a hero, and you would never know it. The young woman in the waiting area shifted uncomfortably. The young man beside her was staring at his phone, pretending the confrontation was not happening. Brennan's voice rose slightly, performing now for his small audience. You see that wall behind you? Those are real soldiers, real leaders, people who built careers through discipline and dedication, not people who gave up on themselves and expect the rest of us to carry them. The old man did not look at the wall again, but something changed in his bearing. A subtle straightening of the spine, a slight squaring of the shoulders. The transformation lasted only a heartbeat before he returned to his stooped posture, but Marcus caught it from his desk. For just that moment, the homeless man had stood like someone inspecting troops. I never asked anyone to carry me, Sergeant. Brennan laughed. Right? Sure. What unit were you with? Let me guess. Special Forces? Delta? Maybe a Navy SEAL? The old man said nothing. That is what I thought. Brennan pulled out his phone. I'm calling the police. You have 30 seconds to walk out that door before I report you for trespassing. The old man remained motionless. His eyes drifted once more to the portraits on the wall, to that one face in particular, and his lips moved slightly, forming words too quiet for anyone to hear. Words meant only for himself, or perhaps for her. The recruitment video playing on the television screen cycled to a new segment. A narrator's voice filled the silence between the men. Modern warfare doctrine, the voice declared, developed over decades of combat experience and strategic innovation, ensures that today's soldier enters battle with every advantage. The screen showed tactical displays, coordinated operations, the fruits of years of military evolution. The old man's eyes moved to the screen, and something flickered across his weathered face. Something that looked almost like recognition, or perhaps ownership. Brennan was already dialing, but Marcus Webb could not shake what he had seen. That momentary transformation, that bearing. He had spent enough time around career soldiers during basic training to recognize something authentic, something earned rather than performed. He opened a browser on his computer and typed 2 words into the search bar. Army Doctrine. The results began to populate his screen. And somewhere in those results, buried beneath layers of military bureaucracy and academic language, was a name connected to a face that might have once belonged to the broken man standing silently by the door. But that discovery was still minutes away. For now, there was only the storm outside, the cold radiating through the glass, and an old man waiting for judgment from a young sergeant who had no idea what stood before him. And on the wall, Lieutenant General Patricia Okafor's portrait watched it all unfold. Silent, knowing, waiting. The phone pressed against Brennan's ear rang twice before the dispatch operator answered. He turned slightly away from the old man, lowering his voice as if that might preserve some professional dignity in front of his potential recruits. The old man did not move. His eyes had found the television screen again, watching the recruitment video cycle through images of soldiers in tactical gear, coordinated movements, precision operations. The narrator continued speaking about modern combat doctrine, and with each word, something shifted behind the old man's weathered face. Not pride exactly, something closer to grief. The images blurred, and he was no longer standing in a Minneapolis recruiting station. He was standing in a church in Fort Bragg, 34 years younger, watching a woman in white walk toward him down the aisle. Margaret. Her smile could stop his heart even now, even after everything. She had worn her mother's pearls and carried lilies because roses seemed too expected for a woman who was anything but ordinary. She had known what she was signing up for. Army wife. Deployments. Missed birthdays and anniversaries celebrated weeks late over scratchy satellite phone connections. She had accepted all of it because she believed in him, because she saw something in the young captain that he had not yet seen in himself. I will always come home to you, he had promised her that night, holding her close in the darkness of their first apartment. Whatever happens, wherever they send me, I will always come home. And he had. 3 deployments. Mogadishu, Iraq, Afghanistan. Each time he came home to her arms, to her patience, to her unwavering faith. She raised their children while he taught other men's children how to survive. She held their family together while he held together units and operations and the fragile threads of American military doctrine. The diagnosis came during his final assignment. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave her 6 months. She made it 5. He had been in Washington when the call came. A briefing at the Pentagon that could not be rescheduled, they told him. National security implications. He had believed them because he needed to believe that his sacrifices meant something larger than himself. Colonel Okonkwo. The aide's voice had been gentle in a way that told him everything before the words came. Sir, it is hospice. You need to come home. Now. The flight from Reagan National to Minneapolis felt like years compressed into hours. Then traffic. An accident on the interstate. Brake lights stretching into infinity while he gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. He arrived at 3:47 in the morning. The hospice room was quiet. The bed was still warm. Margaret had died at 3:12. 35 minutes. He had missed her by 35 minutes. His children were there. Rachel, 23, still wearing her scrubs from the hospital where she was completing her residency rotations. David, 20, home from his junior year at college. They had been with her. They had held her hands. They had heard her final words. He had not. Rachel had tried to embrace him. Dad, Dad, she kept saying, but he could not look at her, could not look at either of them. Their faces were mirrors reflecting Margaret back at him. Rachel had her mother's eyes. David had her smile. Looking at them was like watching her die over and over again. The funeral passed in a blur. The reception. The well-meaning mourners with their casseroles and their condolences. He moved through it all like a ghost, present in body but absent in every way that mattered. Then came the night he left. He had stood in the doorway of the bedroom they had shared for 4 decades. Her pillow still held the impression of her head. Her reading glasses sat on the nightstand next to a novel she would never finish. The closet door hung open, and he could smell her perfume drifting out, that familiar scent that had once meant home and safety and love. He could not breathe, could not think, could not exist in a world where she did not exist. Rachel found him packing a bag at 2 in the morning. Dad, where are you going? He could not answer her, could not explain that every breath in that house was agony, that her face, so like her mother's, was a wound he could not survive. Dad, please, talk to me. Talk to someone. We can get through this together. But he was already moving toward the door, already retreating from everything he had built and everyone who loved him. He left a note on the kitchen table. 3 sentences that would haunt him for years. I love you both. I am sorry. Do not look for me. The memory shattered as Brennan's voice cut through the present. Yeah, I will hold. The old man blinked. The recruiting station materialized around him again. The portraits, the flags, the 2 young potential recruits who were now very deliberately avoiding looking at him. His hand moved unconsciously to his chest, pressing against the layers of worn fabric until he felt the familiar shapes beneath. 2 sets of dog tags on a single chain, and between them, hanging close to his heart, a simple gold band. Her wedding ring. The one he had slipped on her finger 34 years ago with trembling hands and absolute certainty. He had not removed it from the chain in 4 years, had not been able to bring himself to wear it on his finger where it belonged. That felt like claiming a right he had forfeited when he left their children standing in an empty house. Hey, Brennan had finished his call and was moving toward him again. Police will be here in 10 minutes. So unless you want to spend the night in county lockup instead of whatever bridge you crawled out from under, I suggest you start walking. The old man absorbed the words without visible reaction. His fingers remained pressed against his chest. Against a ring. I said, move it, old-timer. Brennan's voice carried across the station, ensuring everyone heard his authority. Whatever war you think you fought is ancient history. This is the modern army. We do not have time for relics who cannot let go of the past. The old man finally lowered his hand. When he looked at Brennan, his eyes held something the young sergeant could not identify. Not anger, not defeat, something deeper, something forged in losses that Brennan could not begin to imagine. I have never had trouble letting go of the past, Sergeant. His gaze drifted once more to the portraits on the wall. 3 faces. He had known them when they were young lieutenants with more ambition than sense. One of them had sobbed in his office after a training exercise went wrong, convinced her career was over. He had talked her through it, shown her how failure was just another form of instruction, told her she would make general one day if she learned to forgive herself. Patricia Okafor had made 3 stars. Her portrait hung in a place of honor, and the man who had shaped her career stood here now, being ordered back into a storm that might kill him by a sergeant who had never heard a shot fired in anger. The irony should have been funny, but nothing was funny anymore. Nothing had been funny since 3:12 in the morning 4 years ago, when the only woman he had ever loved slipped away while he sat in Washington traffic, believing his duty mattered more than his heart. He turned toward the door, toward the killing cold, toward whatever end awaited him. Then the door opened from outside, bringing a gust of frozen wind and a woman in a heavy winter coat. She stamped snow from her boots and looked around the station with a practiced assessment of someone accustomed to reading rooms quickly. Her eyes found the old man, found Brennan's aggressive posture, found the distance everyone else was keeping, and something in her expression shifted, something like recognition, or perhaps just the instinct of someone who had spent decades learning to see what others overlooked. She reached into her coat and produced a laminated identification card. VA Outreach, she announced. I am checking on homeless veterans in the area. The shelters are beyond capacity, and this storm is going to kill people. Her name was Diana Castellanos, and she had just walked into a moment that would change everything. Diana Castellanos had spent 23 years learning to read soldiers. As a combat medic across 3 deployments, she had learned that the body reveals what the mouth conceals. Fear lives in the hands. Courage shows in the spine. And training, real training, the kind that rewires the nervous system and reshapes instinct, that never fully disappears no matter how many years pass or how far man falls. She saw it immediately in the old man by the door. The way he stood, weight balanced, hands visible and still, eyes that had already cataloged every exit, every potential threat, every angle of approach in the room. These were not the habits of a man who had bought a field jacket at a surplus store. These were the reflexes of someone who had lived and operated in environments where such awareness meant the difference between breathing and bleeding out. Brennan turned toward her with barely concealed irritation. Ma'am, this is not a VA facility. If you're looking for homeless veterans, I suggest you try the shelters. The shelters are full, Sergeant. Diana kept her voice level. That is why I am checking commercial locations along this corridor. Business owners sometimes let people wait out dangerous weather. Well, this business owner does not. Brennan gestured toward the old man. I have already called the police to remove this individual. He is disrupting my operation. Diana looked at the old man. He had not moved since she entered, had not spoken, but something in his bearing had shifted almost imperceptibly at the mention of her VA credentials. A slight tension in the shoulders, a guardedness that suggested he had encountered the VA before and the experience had not been positive. Sir, she addressed him directly, her tone gentle but professional. Are you a veteran? The old man's eyes met hers. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he spoke. A long time ago. Brennan laughed. That's what they all say. Every homeless guy with a camo jacket claims he served. Most of them washed out of basic or got discharged for conduct issues. Diana felt her jaw tighten, but kept her composure. She had met 100 men like Brennan during her career. Soldiers who had never deployed, never heard the whistle of incoming rounds, never held a friend's intestines inside their body while screaming for a medevac. They understood the military as an institution of paperwork and procedure. They had no conception of what it forged in those who actually went downrange. What branch? She kept her focus on the old man. Army. What was your MOS? The old man hesitated. Then something shifted in his expression. A decision being made. 11 Bravo originally. Then I moved to other things. Other things. Diana noted the evasion. In her experience, soldiers who were vague about their specialties usually had specialties that required vagueness. Special operations. Intelligence. The kind of work that did not appear on standard service records. Brennan stepped between them. Ma'am, I appreciate what you were trying to do, but I have appointments to keep and recruits to process. This man is trespassing, and the police are on their way. Whatever veteran outreach you want to do, you can do it at the county jail. The two potential recruits in the waiting area exchanged uncomfortable glances. The young woman stood up. I can come back another time, she said. If this is a bad moment. Brennan's face flushed. No, absolutely not. Please sit down. This situation is being handled. He turned back to the old man with renewed aggression. You see what you are doing? You are disrupting operations. You are costing me recruits. This is exactly the problem with the old army. No discipline. No standards. Just a bunch of broken-down veterans expecting the system to carry them. The old man's expression did not change. But Diana saw his hands. They had curled slightly at his sides. Not into fists. Into something else. A position she recognized from her own combatives training. A ready stance that most people would never notice. Brennan did not notice. He was too busy performing his authority, his voice rising to ensure everyone in the station heard his dominance. You want to know what the modern army looks like? He swept his arm toward the recruitment posters. This, technology, precision, doctrine that actually works because it was developed by professionals, not dinosaurs who think grunting through the mud is the height of military achievement. The old man's eyes flickered to the television screen where the recruitment video continued its loop. Modern warfare doctrine, the narrator repeated, developed over decades of combat experience. You know anything about that doctrine, old-timer? Brennan was smirking now. You know how it was developed? By generals and strategists at the highest levels of military planning. People with educations. People with vision. Not people sleeping under bridges. Diana watched the old man's face. Watched something pass behind his eyes that looked almost like pain. Or perhaps dark amusement at a joke only he understood. I know something about it, he said quietly. Sure you do. Brennan laughed again. Let me guess. You wrote the whole thing yourself. You and every other delusional vagrant who thinks his 3 months in basic training made him a military genius. Marcus Webb looked up from his computer screen. His face had gone pale. His fingers hovered frozen over his keyboard. He had found something in his search. Something that had stopped him cold. Sergeant Brennan. Not now, Private. Sergeant, I really think you should see this. I said not now. Brennan kept his eyes locked on the old man. Here is what is going to happen. The police are going to arrive. They're going to escort you out. And you're going to find somewhere else to peddle your fake veteran act. Maybe try a VFW hall. Those oldtimers love a good war story, even a made-up kind. Diana had moved closer to the old man without consciously deciding to do so. Something about him pulled at her memory. Something familiar that she could not quite place. The way he held himself. The economy of his movements. The particular stillness that suggested coiled capability rather than passive surrender. She had seen that bearing before. Once. Years ago. At a lecture at Fort Bragg, given by a colonel whose theories about warfare had become required reading at every military academy in the country. A colonel who had disappeared from public life years ago. A colonel whose photograph she had seen just last month in a military history journal, accompanying an article about his contributions to American combat doctrine. A colonel whose call sign, whispered with reverence among special operations communities, was Prophet. Her heart began to pound. She looked at the old man's wrist where his sleeve had ridden up slightly. Beneath the grime and weathered skin, she could make out the faded edges of a tattoo. Numbers. Coordinates, perhaps. And something else. Letters that might have been initials. Sir. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. What unit were you with? The old man turned to look at her. Really look at her. And in that moment, she saw recognition in his eyes as well. Not of her specifically, but of what she was, what she had been. A soldier who had seen the real face of war. Many units, he said softly. Over many years. Diana reached for her phone. Her hands were trembling. Sergeant Brennan. She did not look away from the old man. I need you to stop talking. Right now. Excuse me? Stop talking. Stop threatening. And do not let this man leave. Brennan stared at her. Lady, you do not give me orders. I do not care what your VA credentials say. But Diana was no longer listening to him. She was looking at the old man. at his posture, at his hands, at the ghost of something legendary hiding beneath 4 years of grief and neglect. And she was dialing a number she had not called in 15 years. A number that might confirm what she was now almost certain she knew. That the architect of modern American warfare was standing in a Minneapolis recruiting station, being threatened with arrest by a sergeant who had no idea he was trying to throw a living legend into the cold. The phone rang 3 times before a voice answered. Gruff, impatient. The voice of a man who had spent 40 years in military intelligence and had no patience for nonsense. Castellanos, it has been a while. What do you need? Diana turned slightly away from the room, lowering her voice. Frank, I need you to run a name for me. Quietly. A pause. Then how quietly? The kind of quietly where you do not log it anywhere. Another pause, longer this time. You know what you are asking? I know, but I need confirmation. I think I'm looking at someone who should not exist anymore. Someone who disappeared. The old man watched her from across the room. He knew what she was doing. She could see it in the resignation settling across his features. For years of anonymity, of deliberate disappearance, of becoming invisible among the invisible. And now a woman with a phone and a memory was threatening to drag him back into a world he had abandoned. Brennan was still talking, still performing his outrage for the recruits who had given up any pretense of not watching. But his words had become background noise, meaningless static against the weight of what was unfolding. Marcus Webb stood up from his desk. His legs felt unsteady. The search results on his screen had multiplied as he dug deeper, clicking through links and archived articles and military databases that were technically above his clearance level, but not protected by anything more than basic passwords. Colonel Ezequiel Okonkwo. The name had appeared first in a small font beneath a photograph in an obscure military history blog. But that photograph had led to others. Official portraits, ceremony images, a younger version of the face he had been studying for the past 10 minutes. The face of the man Sergeant Brennan was threatening to have arrested. The old man felt the weight of the leather journal in his pocket. 73 names. 73 soldiers who had died under his command across 3 decades of service. He had written each name himself in careful print, along with the date and location of their death. Some entries included more. A detail about who they were. A memory of their voice or their laugh. A note about the family they left behind. The first name in the journal was Darnell Washington. The memory came unbidden, as it always did when exhaustion wore down the walls he had built around it. Mogadishu, October 1993. The convoy had been hit 3 blocks from the extraction point. RPGs and small arms fire from every direction. The buildings were enemy territory. Every window a potential gun position. Every doorway a possible ambush. Ezekiel had been a major then, young for his rank, but old in the ways that mattered. He had led his element through the kill zone with the cold precision that would later become his signature. But precision meant nothing when luck turned against you. The round came from a window they had cleared twice. A shooter who had waited with inhuman patience for the perfect moment. Ezekiel never saw him, never had a chance to react. But Darnell did. Sergeant First Class Darnell Washington had served as Ezekiel's team sergeant for 3 years. They had trained together, bled together, buried friends together. Darnell knew Ezekiel's movements better than Ezekiel knew them himself. So when a muzzle flash appeared in that window, when the bullet began its trajectory toward Ezekiel's skull, Darnell was already moving. He took the round in the throat. The impact spun him sideways, and he collapsed against Ezekiel's chest, blood pumping in arterial spurts through fingers that scrambled uselessly to stop it. Ezekiel caught him, lowered him to the ground, pressed his hands against the wound while screaming for a medic who could not reach them through the crossfire. Darnell's eyes had stayed locked on his, even as the light began to fade from them, even as his lips moved around words that would not come, until finally, with his last breath, he managed to speak. Not your fault. His voice was a wet whisper, barely audible over the gunfire. Never your fault, sir. You got too much teaching left to do. Then he was gone. And Ezekiel was holding a body that had been his closest friend, his most trusted soldier, his brother in everything but blood. He finished the mission, extracted his element, wrote the after-action report with hands that still trembled, attended the funeral at Arlington where Darnell's mother gripped his fingers and thanked him for bringing her son home. He never told her that her son had died saving him. Never told anyone. The official report listed the cause of death as enemy fire during combat operations. It said nothing about sacrifice, nothing about the split-second decision that had traded one life for another. Ezekiel carried that weight alone, had carried it for 31 years. His hand moved to his chest again, feeling for the tags beneath his shirt. 2 sets, his own and Darnell's. The metal was worn smooth from decades of contact with his skin. He had promised himself at Arlington that he would carry those tags until he died. That Darnell would never be alone. Some promises you keep even when you have broken all the others. Brennan's voice cut through the memory. What is wrong with you? I'm talking to you, and you're just standing there like a zombie. The old man blinked. The recruiting station materialized around him again. The cold fluorescent lights, the recruitment posters, the portrait wall with its gallery of generals who owed their careers to his teaching. I apologized, Sergeant. My mind wandered. Yeah, I bet it does that a lot. Brennan's contempt was undisguised. Probably all those drugs you people take, frying your brains until you cannot even hold a conversation. I have never used drugs, Sergeant. Sure, and I am the Pope. Marcus stepped out from behind his desk. His heart was pounding so hard he was certain everyone could hear it. Sergeant Brennan, I really need you to look at this. Private Webb. If you interrupt me one more time, you're going to spend the next month on latrine duty. But Marcus did not retreat. He held up his phone, screen facing outward. The photograph displayed there was grainy, pulled from a military archive. But the face was unmistakable. Colonel Ezekiel Okonkwo, Marcus read aloud. His voice cracked on the rank. Distinguished Service Cross, 3 silver stars, Bronze Star with Valor, founder of the Asymmetric Warfare Group, primary architect of Field Manual 324. The room went silent. Diana turned from her phone call, her face pale. Brennan stared at the screen, then at the old man, then back at the screen. The old man simply closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his lids, Darnell Washington smiled at him. Still got teaching left to do, sir. His friend's voice echoed across 3 decades. You promised. I know, brother. The old man's lips moved without sound. I know. The silence stretched like a hell breath. Marcus stood frozen with his phone extended, the photograph glowing in the dim station light. Brennan's mouth opened and closed twice without producing sound. The 2 potential recruits in the waiting area had gone perfectly still, sensing that they were witnessing something far beyond a simple confrontation. Diana lowered her phone from her ear. Her contact was still talking, confirming what Marcus had just announced, but she no longer needed confirmation. The photograph on the private screen matched the man standing by the door, aged by years and grief and exposure, weathered into something almost unrecognizable, but the same. The eyes were the same. That patient, measuring gaze that saw everything and revealed nothing. Brennan recovered first. His voice came out strained, defensive. That could be anyone. These homeless guys, they find pictures online, they memorize names and dates. It is a scam. Stolen valor. The old man opened his eyes. He looked at Brennan with something that might have been pity. Diana stepped forward. Colonel Okonkwo. She said the name carefully, watching his face for reaction. Is that you, sir? The old man said nothing for a long moment. Then, very quietly, that was my name. A long time ago. Was your name? Brennan seized on the words. See? He is already hedging, already setting up his excuse for when we prove he is lying. But his voice had lost its certainty. The photograph on Marcus's phone was too clear. The medals listed beneath it too specific. Distinguished Service Cross. That was not a decoration anyone claimed lightly. The paperwork trail alone would expose a fraud within hours. Diana moved closer to the old man. She kept her movements slow, non-threatening, the way she had learned to approach wounded soldiers in the field. Men who had seen too much and trusted too little. Sir, I was at Fort Bragg in 2004. You gave a lecture on asymmetric warfare to a room full of junior officers and NCOs. I was a specialist then. Combat médic. I sat in the back row and took notes until my hand cramped. The old man's expression flickered. Fort Bragg. He repeated the words like they belonged to a foreign language he had once spoken fluently. You talked about the evolution of insurgency tactics, about how conventional forces had to adapt their thinking to fight unconventional enemies. Diana's voice grew stronger as the memory solidified. You said something I never forgot. You said that the most dangerous weapon in any conflict is not a rifle or a bomb. It is certainty. The certainty that you understand your enemy. The certainty that your doctrine is sufficient. The certainty that you have already won. The old man's eyes met hers. And what did I say was the antidote to certainty? Humility. Diana felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Humility and constant adaptation. You said that every soldier who believes they have nothing left to learn is already dead. They just do not know it yet. The room had gone completely still. Even Brennan had stopped talking, caught in the weight of an exchange he could not fully comprehend. The old man nodded slowly. You listen well, specialist. I tried, sir. Diana's voice cracked. That lecture changed how I approached every mission afterward. Every soldier I treated. Every situation I faced. She paused, swallowing hard. I'm not a specialist anymore. I work for the VA now. Outreach coordinator. I try to find veterans who have fallen through the cracks. The old man almost smiled. It seemed he had fallen quite far through the cracks himself. For years. The words came out before Diana could stop them. Sir, you have been missing for 4 years. Your family has been looking for you. The army has been looking for you. There was a memorial service. The old man flinched. A memorial service. Your daughter spoke. Diana had read about it in a military publication. She talked about your legacy, about what you meant to the soldiers you trained. She begged anyone who might have information to come forward. Rachel. The name escaped his lips like a prayer, like a wound reopening. Marcus had lowered his phone. He stood watching the exchange with an expression of dawning horror. The magnitude of what Sergeant Brennan had almost done was becoming clear to him. They had nearly thrown a living legend into a killing blizzard, had nearly added another tragedy to a story already soaked in loss. Sir, Marcus stepped forward hesitantly. Is there anything I can get you? Water? Coffee? We have a break room in the back. The old man looked at the young private, at the genuine concern on his face, at the decency that Brennan's bluster had not managed to extinguish. That is kind of you, Private, but I should go. I have caused enough disruption. He turned toward the door, toward the storm still raging beyond the glass. The wind had picked up since he arrived, driving snow sideways in sheets that reduced visibility to nearly nothing. Diana caught his arm. Sir, you cannot go out there. The temperature has dropped another 5 degrees since I came in. The shelters are full. You will die. The old man looked down at her hand on his sleeve. The contact was gentle, but it was the first time anyone had touched him with kindness in longer than he could remember. Perhaps that would be appropriate, he said softly. No. Diana's grip tightened. No, sir. That is not appropriate. That is not how this ends. Brennan cleared his throat. He had retreated behind his desk, creating distance from a situation that had spiraled beyond his control. Look, maybe I was hasty. If this guy is who he says he is, then obviously we should not throw him out. But we still do not have confirmation. Anyone could claim to be this colonel. Diana turned on him. Her eyes blazed with a fury that made Brennan take an involuntary step backward. Anyone could claim to be him? She released the old man's arm and advanced on Brennan's desk. You want confirmation, Sergeant? Fine. She pulled up a number on her phone. I have a contact at the Pentagon who is already running his file. But while we wait, let me ask you something. You spent the last 20 minutes lecturing this man about modern Army doctrine, about how it was developed by professionals at the highest levels of military planning. Brennan said nothing. Field Manual 324. Diana's voice cut like glass. Counterinsurgency operations. The foundational text for everything we did in Iraq and Afghanistan after the initial invasions. The doctrine you've been bragging about. She pointed at the old man. He wrote it. The first draft. In a command post in Baghdad, while mortars fell outside. He sent it up the chain, and it became the basis for everything that followed. Brennan's face had gone pale. The asymmetric warfare group. Diana continued, relentless. The unit that developed half the tactics you train your recruits on. He founded it, built it from nothing, trained the first generation of operators who went on to train everyone else. She stepped closer to his desk, her voice dropping to something almost worse than shouting. And you were about to throw him into a blizzard because he did not look the way you thought a hero should look. The door to the station opened. 2 police officers stepped inside, brushing snow from their shoulders. One of them, older with graying temples, looked around the room and read the tension immediately. We got a call about a trespasser, he said carefully. Someone want to tell me what is going on here? Diana turned to face him. Officer, I need you to wait. This situation has changed significantly in the last few minutes. The older officer's eyes moved to the old man. Took in the worn field jacket, the plastic-wrapped boots, the bearing that seemed somehow out of place with his appearance. Sir, the officer addressed him directly. Are you the individual in question? The old man straightened slightly, that unconscious military bearing surfacing again. I am. The officer studied him for a long moment. Then his gaze dropped to the old man's chest, to the faint outline of metal beneath his shirt, to the chain just visible at his collar. Are those dog tags, sir? They are. May I ask what branch you served in? Army. The old man's voice was steady now. 34 years. The older officer nodded slowly. His partner, younger and impatient, shifted restlessly by the door. My father served 30 years, the older officer said quietly. Vietnam, and after. He had that same look you have, that same way of standing. He glanced at Brennan, then back at the old man. Why don't we all just take a breath here and figure out what is actually happening? Behind them, through the glass doors, the storm continued to rage. But inside the station, something had shifted. The balance of power that Brennan had wielded so carelessly was tilting towards something else. Something that would not be stopped by rank or procedure or convenient assumptions. Diana's phone buzzed in her hand. She looked at the screen, read the message there, and felt her heart stop. 3 words, then a name, then a promise that changed everything. Confirmed. Colonel Okonkwo. Calling General Okafor now. Diana stared at her phone screen. The words glowed there like a verdict. Confirmed. Colonel Okonkwo. Calling General Okafor now. Her hands began to tremble. She had suspected. She had hoped. But seeing the confirmation in black and white made it real in a way that her instincts alone could not. The older police officer was still watching the old man with quiet assessment. His partner had moved toward Brennan's desk, trying to get a coherent statement about the original complaint. But Brennan's earlier confidence had collapsed into stammering half-explanations that satisfied no one. He was trespassing. Brennan's voice had lost its theatrical edge. I asked him to leave, and he refused. That is all. Standard procedure. The older officer ignored him. His attention remained fixed on the old man, on the way he held himself despite the obvious exhaustion, on the stillness that spoke of discipline rather than defeat. Sir, the officer said gently, would you like to sit down? There are chairs in the waiting area. The old man hesitated. His eyes moved to the 2 potential recruits who still sat frozen in those chairs, witnesses to a drama they had never expected when they walked in for their appointments. I do not want to disturb anyone further. You are not disturbing anyone. The older officer gestured toward an empty chair. Please, seat. It was not a command. It was an invitation. And something in the way it was offered, without judgment or agenda, broke through the old man's resistance. He moved slowly to the chair and lowered himself into it. His joints protested the movement, stiff from cold and age and too many nights sleeping on concrete. But once seated, his spine remained straight. His hands rested on his thighs, palms down, fingers still. Marcus approached with a paper cup of coffee. He had retrieved it from the break room without being asked. moving quietly while the adults negotiated their standoff. "Sir," he held out the cup. "It is not great coffee, but it is hot." The old man looked up at the young private, at the nervousness in his face and the genuine kindness beneath it. He accepted the cup with both hands, letting the warmth seep into fingers that had been numb for hours. "Thank you, Private." Marcus nodded and retreated, but he did not return to his desk. He positioned himself near the door, watching everything, recording nothing, understanding that some moments were too important for documentation. Diana crossed the room and knelt beside the old man's chair. She kept her voice low, private, meant only for him. "Sir, I need to tell you something. My contact at the Pentagon has confirmed your identity. He is reaching out to General Okafor right now." The old man's hands tightened around the coffee cup. "Patricia." "Yes, sir. Lieutenant General Patricia Okafor, Commanding General of Army Recruiting Command." Diana paused. "She is in Minneapolis, here for a conference. She could be at this station within the hour." The old man closed his eyes. Of course Patricia was here. Of course she would be the one to find him. The universe had a cruel sense of poetry. "She was a lieutenant when I knew her," he said quietly. "Brilliant, driven, terrified of failure." Diana nodded. "She credits you with her entire career. I read an interview where she talked about a colonel who mentored her through her darkest moment, who convinced her she could become a general when she was ready to quit." The old man opened his eyes. He stared at the far wall, at the portrait of the woman Patricia had become. 3 stars on her shoulders, confidence in her posture, a leader forged in the fires he had helped her walk through. "I told her that failure was just instruction," he murmured, "that the only real defeat was refusing to learn." "She learned," Diana said. "She learned everything you taught her." Brennan had moved out from behind his desk. The younger police officer had finally extracted a statement from him, but it was clear that the original complaint had lost all relevance. He stood uncertainly in the middle of the room, stripped of the authority he had wielded so carelessly. The older officer approached Diana. "Ma'am, you said a general is on her way?" "Yes." Diana rose from her crouch. "Lieutenant General Okafor. She commands Army Recruiting Command. This station falls under her authority." The officer's eyebrows rose. "And she knows this man?" "She knows him." Diana glanced at the old man. "She owes him everything." The young woman in the waiting area finally spoke. She had been silent through the entire confrontation, watching with wide eyes as the situation evolved beyond anything she could have anticipated. "Is he really who they say he is?" Her voice was small, uncertain. "A colonel?" The old man turned to look at her. She was perhaps 22, wearing clothes that suggested she had worked a night shift before coming to her appointment. Tired, determined, try to build something better for herself. He said simply, "a long time ago." "What happened?" The question hung in the air. Direct, unfiltered. The kind of question only someone young enough to not know better would ask. The old man considered his answer. He could deflect, could offer a vague response that satisfied without revealing. But something about her earnestness, her willingness to sit through chaos for the chance at a future, reminded him of soldiers he had trained decades ago. Young people seeking direction, purpose, meaning. "I lost someone," he said finally. "Someone I could not live without. And instead of facing that loss, I ran from it. From everyone who loved me. From everything I had built." The young woman absorbed this. She did not offer platitudes or empty comfort. She simply nodded, as if she understood something about loss that her years should not have taught her. "My mom died when I was 16, she said. "Cancer. I wanted to run too, but I had a little brother who needed me." She paused. "Sometimes staying is harder than leaving." The old man looked at her with new eyes. "Yes, it is." Brennan shifted uncomfortably. The conversation had moved into territory he could not navigate, emotions he could not process or control. He retreated further toward his desk, tried to become invisible in his own station. The older police officer touched his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. We're going to be at this location for a while. The situation has evolved. No criminal activity. Repeat, no criminal activity. We're standing by for the arrival of military personnel." The radio crackled an acknowledgement. Diana's phone rang. She looked at the screen, and her face went pale. "It is her," she whispered. "It is General Okafor." She answered the call. "General." "Yes, ma'am. I am at the downtown recruiting station." "Yes. He is here. He is safe." She listened for a moment. Her eyes glistened. "Yes, ma'am. I understand. We will not let him leave." She ended the call and turned to the room. "General Okafor is 15 minutes out. She has requested that Colonel Okonkwo remain here until she arrives." The old man stared at the floor. 15 minutes. After 4 years of hiding, 4 years of anonymity, for years of becoming no one, he had 15 minutes left before his past caught up with him. His hand moved to his chest, to the tags, to Margaret's ring, to the weight of everyone he had lost and everyone he had left behind. Darnell's voice echoed in his memory. "You got too much teaching left to do." And Margaret's voice, softer, from their last phone call before he lost her forever. "Come home to me, Zeke. Just come home." He had failed her then, had arrived too late to hold her hand, to hear her voice, to say goodbye. But maybe, just maybe, it was not too late for everything else. The coffee had gone cold in his hands. But for the first time in 4 years, something warm was stirring in his chest, something that felt almost like hope. The old man could have left. The police had confirmed no criminal activity. The door was 15 feet away. The storm outside would swallow him within seconds, erase his tracks, return him to the invisibility he had cultivated for 4 years. He did not move. His fingers found the chain around his neck and pulled it free from beneath his shirt. The tags caught the fluorescent light, worn metal reflecting dull silver. 2 sets, his own and Darnell's, and between them, the gold band that had once circled Margaret's finger. Diana watched him hold the tags. She had seen soldiers do this before, in hospitals, in grief counseling sessions, in the quiet moments before they decided whether to keep fighting or surrender. The tags were anchors, connections to something larger than present pain. "Sir," she spoke softly, "may I ask you something?" The old man did not look up. "You may ask. Why did you come here today? Of all the places you could have gone for shelter, why a recruiting station?" He was silent for a long moment. His thumb traced the engraving on Darnell's tags, the name worn almost smooth from years of this same gesture. "The portraits," he said finally. "I wanted to see if they remembered." Diana glanced at the wall, at the faces of generals and admirals who presided over the station. "You trained some of them." 3. He nodded slowly. "Patricia, James Morrison, Edward Shun before he transferred to Navy. They were lieutenants when I knew them. Convinced they knew everything. Terrified they knew nothing. And you taught them. I tried to show them that both were true. That certainty and doubt could coexist. That the best leaders were the ones who questioned themselves constantly while projecting confidence to their soldiers." The young woman in the waiting area had moved closer. She sat 2 chairs away from the old man now, drawn by something she could not name. Her appointment had been forgotten. The life she had planned to discuss with a recruiter seemed small against the weight of what was unfolding. "You said you lost someone?" she ventured. "Your wife?" The old man's hand closed around Margaret's ring. 42 years. His voice was barely audible. "We met when I was a 2nd lieutenant. She was a nurse at the base hospital. I came in with a broken hand from a training accident. She told me I was the worst patient she had ever seen." The young woman almost smiled. Love at first sight? Annoyance at first sight. He almost smiled too, the expression strange on his weathered face. "She thought I was arrogant. I thought she was impossible. We were married 6 months later." The memory opened like a door he had kept locked for 4 years. Margaret laughing in the kitchen of their first apartment. Margaret holding Rachel for the first time, tears streaming down her face. Margaret standing on the tarmac at 3 in the morning, waiting for his plane to land, refusing to go home until she saw him walk off that ramp. "She waited for me," he continued. "Every deployment, every missed anniversary, every phone call at 2 in the morning telling her I would be gone another month. She never complained, never asked me to choose between her and the Army." He looked down at the ring in his palm. "When she got sick, I was in Washington. Briefings, meetings, important things that seemed important. She told me not to worry, Told me she had good doctors. Told me to finish what I was doing and come home when I could. His voice cracked. I should have come home immediately. I should have been there every moment. Instead, I convinced myself that duty mattered, that the work I was doing would save lives, that she would understand. Diana felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. She died at 3:12 in the morning. I landed at 2:47. Traffic on the interstate. An accident. Brake lights for miles. I ran the last half mile from where I left my car. I made it to her room at 3:47. He looked up, and his eyes were those of a man who had seen the worst of war and found something more terrible waiting at home. 35 minutes. I missed saying goodbye to my wife by 35 minutes. The room had gone completely silent. Even Brennan, still hovering near his desk, had stopped fidgeting. The younger police officer had removed his hat. Marcus stood by the door with tears running openly down his face. I could not look at my children, the old man continued. Rachel has her mother's eyes. David has her smile. Every time I saw them, I saw her. And I saw my failure. The husband who chose a briefing over a deathbed. So you left, Diana whispered. I left a note. Told him I loved them. Told him not to look for me. And then I disappeared. He tucked the tags and ring back beneath his shirt, pressing them against his heart. For years. I have been walking for 4 years. Sleeping under bridges. Eating from dumpsters. Telling myself I deserved nothing better. That the cold and hunger were penance for arriving too late. The young woman was crying now. Quiet tears that she did not bother to hide. Your children, she said. They're still looking for you? Diana nodded. His daughter called the VA every month for 2 years. Left her contact information everywhere. Never stopped. The old man closed his eyes. Rachel, David. He spoke their names like prayers. Like confessions. Like promises he had broken and desperately wanted to restore. General Okafor told me something on the phone. Diana's voice was gentle. She said your daughter is in medical school now. 3rd year. Top of her class. And your son teaches high school history. Coaches the debate team. The old man's shoulders began to shake. She said they never stopped talking about you. Never stopped hoping. She paused. She said Rachel still sets a place for you at Thanksgiving. Every year. An empty chair at the table. A sound escaped the old man's throat. Not quite a sob. Something deeper. Something that had been locked away for 4 years and could no longer be contained. The older police officer stepped forward. He moved slowly, deliberately, the way you approach someone on the edge of a cliff. Sir, his voice was rough with emotion. My father served 30 years. When he came home from Vietnam, he was not the same man who left. He struggled, made mistakes, hurt people he loved because he did not know how to stop hurting himself. The old man looked up at him. It took him 20 years to ask for help, 20 years of pushing everyone away. But when he finally did, when he finally let us back in, those last years were the best of his life. He got to know his grandchildren. He got to make amends. The officer crouched down to eye level. It is not too late, sir. It is never too late to come home. The door to the station rattled as the wind outside surged. Through the glass, the storm raged on, indifferent to the human drama playing out in its shadow. But inside, in the warmth of a recruiting station that had become something else entirely, a man who had been running for 4 years felt something shift in his chest. Not absolution, not forgiveness. Those would take time if they came at all. But the first small crack in the wall he had built around himself. The first faint light in 4 years of darkness. He was still sitting there, tears drying on his weathered cheeks, when the headlights of General Okafor's vehicle cut through the storm outside. The headlights cut through the blizzard like searchlights, illuminating sheets of snow that twisted and spiraled in the wind. A black SUV pulled to the curb outside the recruiting station, government plates barely visible beneath the accumulating ice. Everyone in the station turned toward the glass doors. Everyone except the old man. He remained seated, eyes fixed on the floor, hands pressed flat against his thighs. The posture of a soldier awaiting judgment. Diana moved toward the entrance. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had seen photographs of General Okafor, had read interviews, and studied her career trajectory. But nothing prepared her for the woman who stepped through the doors and brought the cold authority of 30 years of command with her. Lieutenant General Patricia Okafor stood 5 feet 7 inches tall, but her presence filled the room like she was twice that height. Her dress uniform was immaculate despite the weather. 3 silver stars gleamed on each shoulder. Her face was carved from determination and discipline, showing nothing of what she might be feeling. Behind her came 2 aides, a colonel and a major, both looking thoroughly confused about why their commanding general had abandoned a conference dinner to race across Minneapolis in a blizzard. Okafor's eyes swept the room, took in the police officers standing at awkward attention, took in Brennan frozen behind his desk, took in Marcus by the door and Diana near the entrance and the 2 young recruits who had witnessed everything. Then her gaze found the old man in the plastic chair. She went completely still. For a long moment, no one breathed. The wind howled outside, rattling the glass doors, but inside the station time itself seemed to pause. The old man finally looked up. His eyes met hers across the room. For years of absence, for years of grief and running and hiding from everything he had been, all of it compressed into the space between them. Colonel. Okafor's voice came out steady, but those who knew her well would have heard the fracture beneath the surface. Ezekiel. Patricia. His voice was a rasp. You made 3 stars. I always knew you would. She crossed the room in 5 strides. Her aides moved to follow, but she stopped them with a sharp gesture. This moment belonged to no one but them. She stood before him, looking down at the man who had shaped her career, who had talked her off the ledge when she was ready to resign her commission after a training disaster that killed 2 soldiers under her command, who had shown her that failure was not an ending, but a beginning. He looked nothing like she remembered. The years and the streets had carved him down to bone and sinew, had weathered his face into something ancient and worn. But his eyes, those patient, seeing eyes that missed nothing, those were exactly the same. Sir, the word came out broken. We thought you were dead. He shook his head slowly. Just lost. I looked for you. Her voice cracked despite her efforts to control it. Every resource I had, every contact, every favor I could call in. For years, sir. For years of nothing. I did not want to be found. Why? The question hung between them. Simple. Devastating. The only question that mattered. The old man reached beneath his shirt and withdrew the chain. The tags. The ring. He held them in his palm, offering them as explanation. I arrived 35 minutes too late, Patricia. She died alone because I was stuck in traffic coming back from a briefing I should never have attended. Okafor stared at the ring, at the tags worn smooth with decades of handling. Margaret. Yes. Oh, Ezekiel. I cannot face them. Rachel and David. I cannot look at them without seeing her, without seeing my failure. So I ran. Okafor lowered herself into the chair beside him. Her aides exchanged shocked glances. They had never seen their general sit at the same level as anyone. She would not have wanted this, Okafor said quietly. Margaret, she would not have wanted you to destroy yourself. The old man's hand tightened around the ring. I know, but grief does not listen to reason. By the time I understood that, I had already been gone too long. I convinced myself they were better off without me, that my absence was a mercy rather than a cruelty. It was neither. Okafor's voice hardened slightly. It was a wound, one that has not healed for any of them. The old man flinched. Your daughter, Okafor continued. She called me personally, 3 times in the first year, begging me to use military resources to find you. I had to tell her there were limits to what I could do for a civilian search. She should not have involved you. She loves you. Okafor leaned forward. She has never stopped loving you. Neither has David. They're not angry, Ezekiel. They're terrified. Terrified that you're dead in a ditch somewhere. Terrified that they will never know what happened to their father. The old man closed his eyes. The weight of her words pressed down on him like a physical force. Behind them, Brennan cleared his throat. He had been silent since Okafor's arrival, trying to make himself invisible. But invisibility was no longer an option. General, his voice cracked. I do not know. When he came in, I had no idea who he was. I was just following protocol. Okafor did not turn around. Sergeant Brennan, I am aware of exactly what you did. I will deal with you later. Brennan's face went white. Right now, Okafor continued, still focused on the old man. There's only one thing that matters. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a phone. Not her official device. A personal cell phone, older model, protected by a case decorated with medical symbols. I called your daughter on my way here, she said. I told her I had found you, that you were alive. The old man's eyes flew open. Patricia. She's on her way to the airport right now. Her brother is driving from Wisconsin. They will both be in Minneapolis by morning. No. The old man's voice shook. No, I cannot. I'm not ready. Look at me. Look at what I have become. Okafor gripped his hand. Her fingers were warm and steady against his cold skin. They do not care what you have become. They care that you are alive. They care that they finally have a chance to bring you home. I do not deserve to go home. That is not your decision to make. Okafor's voice was fierce. You taught me that. You taught me that we do not get to decide our own worth. That our value is determined by the lives we touch and the people who love us. She squeezed his hand hard enough to hurt. You touched thousands of lives, Ezekiel. You saved more soldiers than you will ever know. And right now, there are two people on their way to this city who have spent 4 years praying for exactly this moment. Tears spilled down the old man's cheeks. He did not try to stop them. I do not know how to be their father anymore. I do not know how to be anything except what I have become. Then let them teach you. Okafor's own eyes glistened. Let them show you the way back. The same way you showed me, all those years ago, when I was lost and convinced I would never find my way again. The old man looked at her. At this woman he had mentored when she was young and terrified and certain she was not good enough. At the general she had become. At the friend who had crossed a city in a blizzard because she refused to let him disappear again. Patricia. His voice was barely a whisper. I'm so tired. I know, sir. She held his hand between both of hers. I know you are, but you do not have to carry this alone anymore. You never did. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside the recruiting station, something was changing. Something was breaking free from 4 years of ice and isolation. The old man bowed his head, and for the first time since Margaret died, he let someone else help him carry the weight. The station had transformed. What had begun as a confrontation between a sergeant and a vagrant had become something else entirely. A vigil, a gathering of strangers bound together by the gravity of what they were witnessing. General Okafor had not released the old man's hand. She sat beside him in the plastic chair, her 3-star authority set aside in favor of something more fundamental. Friendship, loyalty, the debt that could never be fully repaid. Her aide stood near the door, speaking quietly into phones, rearranging schedules, and canceling appearances. The conference dinner would proceed without its keynote speaker. There were more important things happening in this recruiting station than any speech could address. Diana had moved to the corner, giving the reunion space while remaining close enough to help if needed. The older police officer stood with her, his partner having returned to their vehicle to file a report that would require considerable creative writing to capture accurately. Marcus remained at his post by the door. He had not stopped crying since the general arrived. Everything he thought he knew about service and sacrifice and what it meant to be a soldier had been rewritten in the past hour. The young woman from the waiting area had finally left, not for her appointment, which had been forgotten entirely, but because she understood that some moments were too sacred for outsiders. She had paused at the door and looked back at the old man one final time. I hope your children forgive you, she said. I hope you forgive yourself. Then she was gone into the storm, leaving behind only the memory of her words. Brennan had retreated to the back office. He sat at a small desk surrounded by filing cabinets and recruitment materials, staring at nothing. His career, which had seemed so certain an hour ago, now balanced on a knife's edge. He had tried to throw a legend into a blizzard, had mocked a man whose contributions to the army exceeded anything Brennan would accomplish in a lifetime. In the main room, General Okafor finally spoke again. Tell me about these past 4 years, she said. Not to judge, just to understand. The old man stared at the floor. What could he begin? How could he compress 4 years of wandering into words that made sense. The first year was the hardest, he said slowly. I walked, just walked, through cities and towns I did not recognize. I did not eat much, did not sleep much. I think part of me was hoping the road would just take me, that I would lie down one night and not wake up. But you did wake up. Every time. He almost smiled, though there was no humor in it. The body has its own ideas about survival, even when the mind has given up. Where did you go? Everywhere. Nowhere. I crossed the country twice before I stopped moving. Ended up here because the cold felt appropriate. Like penance. Okafor's grip tightened on his hand. You punish yourself for 4 years, she said, for arriving 35 minutes late. I punish myself for 42 years of arriving late. Every deployment, every missed birthday, every time I chose duty over family, because I convinced myself the work mattered more than the people waiting for me. The work didn't matter, Okafor said carefully. You save lives. You change how this country fights wars. And I lost the one life that mattered most. The words hung in the air between them. True and terrible and impossible to argue against. Diana stepped forward. Sir, may I say something? The old man looked up at her. The VA coordinator who had recognized him, who had set everything in motion with a phone call and a memory of a lecture given decades ago. You may. I have worked with hundreds of veterans over the past 15 years. Men and women who came back from war and could not find their way home, who struggled with guilt and grief and the weight of things they had seen and done. She knelt beside his chair, her eyes level with his. The ones who survived, the ones who found their way back, they all had one thing in common. They stopped believing they had to earn their right to exist. They stopped thinking they had to suffer enough to deserve help. The old man said nothing. Your wife loved you, Diana continued. She waited for you through 3 deployments and 42 years of service. Do you really think she would want this? Do you think she would look at you now and feel satisfied that you had suffered enough? Tears slid down the old man's weathered cheeks. Margaret never wanted me to suffer. She wanted me to come home. Then come home. Diana's voice was fierce. Not to a place. To yourself. To your children. To the life you still have left to live. The old man looked at Okafor. At the stars on her shoulders. At the woman she had become. You really believe they will forgive me? I believe they already have. Okafor reached into her uniform pocket and withdrew her personal phone again. She pulled up a message and held the screen where he could see it. This is what your daughter texted me 20 minutes ago. The old man leaned forward. The words on the screen blurred through his tears, but he read them anyway. Tell him we love him. Tell him we never stopped. Tell him to please just stay there. We are coming. We are finally coming to bring him home. A sound escaped his throat, something between a sob and a laugh. Something that had been locked inside him for 4 years and could finally break free. Rachel. His voice was a whisper. My Rachel. She will be here in 6 hours, Okafor said. David will arrive around the same time. They had been making calls the entire drive, arranging time off from work, canceling everything that does not matter. The old man pressed his palm against his chest, against the tags and the ring that had been his only companions for 4 years. What do I say to them? How do I explain? You do not have to explain anything. Okafor stood, pulling him gently to his feet. You just have to be here. You just have to let them see you. Let them hold you. Let them bring you back. The old man swayed slightly. Diana moved to steady him on one side. The older police officer appeared on the other, offering silent support. There is a hotel 2 blocks from here, Okafor said. I have already arranged a room. You need a shower, clean clothes, food, and rest. She paused. If you will allow it. The old man looked around the station one final time. At the portraits on the wall. At the flags. At the recruitment posters promising careers and purpose and belonging. He had given 34 years to this institution, had shaped its doctrine and trained its leaders and bled for its mission. And in return, it had given him something he had not expected, a path back to everything he had lost. I will allow it, he said quietly. He looked at Okafor. Thank you, Patricia, for not giving up on me. She smiled, and for a moment the general disappeared and the young lieutenant he had mentored 3 decades ago showed through. You taught me that failure is just instruction, sir. That the only real defeat is refusing to learn. She offered him her arm. Now let me teach you something. Let me show you that it is never too late to start again. Together, they walked toward the door, toward the storm that still raged outside, toward the morning that was coming, when two children who had never stopped searching would finally find their father. The hotel room was warm. That was the first thing he noticed. Warm in a way that seeped into bones that had forgotten what comfort felt like. The radiator hummed beneath the window, pushing back against the cold that pressed against the glass from outside. General Okafor had arranged everything. A suite on the third floor with a view of the city lights blurred by falling snow. Clean clothes laid out on the bed, purchased from a 24-hour store by one of her aides. Toiletries arranged in the bathroom. A meal from the hotel kitchen waiting under silver covers on the small dining table. The old man stood in the center of the room, overwhelmed by the simple abundance of it. A bed with clean sheets. A bathroom with hot water. Food that he had not pulled from a dumpster or begged from a soup kitchen. Take your time, Okafor said from the doorway. I will be in the room next door. If you need anything at all, just knock. Patricia. She paused. Why are you doing this? He turned to face her. You have a career, a command, responsibilities that matter far more than one broken old man. Okafor stepped back into the room. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her uniform somehow less imposing in the soft light of the hotel room. Do you remember what you told me? She said after the training accident. After I killed those two soldiers with a decision I made in the field? The old man nodded slowly. He remembered. A young lieutenant sobbing in his office, convinced her life was over, convinced she had no right to wear the uniform. I told you that the weight you carry proves you are the right person to carry it, that only those who feel the full burden of command are worthy of command. You told me more than that. Okafor's voice was quiet. You told me that I would make general one day, that the army needed leaders who understood the cost of their decisions, leaders who felt every death as a personal failure, not a statistic. I believed it. You made me believe it. She crossed the room and stood before him. You saved my life that day, sir. Not from a bullet or an explosion. From myself. From the certainty that I was worthless and broken beyond repair. Her hand found his shoulder. So when you ask why I'm doing this, the answer is simple. Because you taught me what it means to serve. And service does not end when a uniform comes off. She squeezed his shoulder once, then stepped back. Shower, eat, rest. Your children will be here in 5 hours. And when they arrive, you're going to look them in the eyes and let them bring you home. Then she was gone, the door clicking softly behind her. The old man stood alone in the warm room. For a long moment, he did not move. Then, slowly, he walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower. The water was hot, hotter than anything he had felt in 4 years. He stood beneath the spray and let it pound against skin that had forgotten the sensation of cleanliness. The grime of the streets ran down the drain in gray rivulets. He watched it go, wondering if the stains on his soul could be washed away as easily. He stayed in the shower until the water began to cool. Then he dried himself with towels that smelled of lavender detergent and dressed in the clean clothes that had been provided. Simple things. A flannel shirt, dark trousers, socks without holes, shoes that fit. He caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror and stopped. The face that looked back at him was gaunt and weathered, lined with years and grief. His beard was still unkempt, his hair too long. But the eyes were different. Something had shifted in them. Something that had been dead for 4 years was flickering back to life. He moved to the dining table and lifted the silver covers from the plates. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, a roll still warm from the oven. Simple food, but more than he had eaten in a single sitting for longer than he could remember. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, remembering what it felt like to taste rather than simply consume, to nourish rather than merely survive. When the plate was empty, he moved to the window and looked out at the city. The storm was beginning to ease. The snow still fell, but lighter now, drifting rather than driving. The streets below were empty except for the occasional plow pushing through the accumulation. Somewhere out there, his children were coming. Rachel, his brilliant girl who had become a doctor despite his absence, who had stood at his memorial service and spoken about his legacy while believing him dead, who had called generals and senators and anyone who might help her find the father who had abandoned her. David, his quiet son who had become a teacher, who shaped young minds the way Ezekiel had shaped young soldiers, who had inherited his mother's patience and his father's stubborn determination. They were driving through the night, through the tail end of a blizzard, to reach a man who had walked away from them without explanation or goodbye. The old man pressed his forehead against the cold glass. "I do not deserve this," he whispered. "I do not deserve them." But even as he spoke the words, he felt the chain against his chest, the tags, the ring. Darnell's voice echoing across 30 years. "You got too much teaching left to do." And Margaret's voice, softer, from a memory he had tried to bury. "Come home to me, Zeke. Just come home." He had not come home to her, had arrived too late for goodbye. But maybe if the universe showed mercy he did not deserve, he could still come home to them, to the children she had given him, to the family that had never stopped hoping. He moved to the bed and lay down on clean sheets for the first time in 4 years. The mattress was soft beneath his tired body. The pillow cradled his head like an embrace. He did not expect to sleep. His mind was too full, his heart too heavy with anticipation and fear. But exhaustion is a force that overrides intention. Within minutes, his eyes had closed. And for the first time in 4 years, Ezekiel Okonkwo slept without dreaming of what he had lost. Instead, he dreamed of Margaret, not dying, not fading, but smiling at him from across their kitchen table, her eyes full of love. "Go to them," she said. "They need you, and you need them." "I am scared," he admitted. "I do not know how to be their father anymore." Her smile widened. "You never stopped being their father. You just forgot for a while." She reached across the table and touched his face. "Wake up, Zeke. They're almost here." He woke to morning light streaming through the window. The storm had passed. The sky was clear and pale with winter sun. And somewhere in the hotel below, he heard a voice. A woman's voice, cracking with emotion. "Where is he? Please, where is my father?" "Rachel." The old man rose from the bed. His hands trembled as he moved toward the door. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. 4 years of running, 4 years of hiding. And now, finally, it was time to face what he had left behind. The hallway stretched before him like the longest distance he had ever traveled. Longer than any march through hostile territory. Longer than any mission into the unknown. Each step toward the elevator carried the weight of 4 years of absence, for years of silence, for years of a choice he could never fully explain. He could hear voices rising from the lobby below. Rachel's voice, high and urgent. Another voice, deeper. David. They were both here. They had driven through the night, through the remnants of a blizzard, to reach this hotel in Minneapolis. To reach him. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. The descent took only seconds, but each moment stretched into eternity. He watched the numbers count down. 3, 2, 1. The doors opened. The lobby was bright with morning sun reflecting off fresh snow outside. General Okafor stood near the front desk, still in uniform, speaking quietly with her aides. Diana Castellanos sat in one of the armchairs, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she had not slept. And there, standing in the center of the lobby, were his children. Rachel saw him first. She was 31 now, no longer the young woman he had left behind. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore scrubs beneath her winter coat, as if she had come directly from a hospital shift. Her mother's eyes stared out from her face, and the sight of them nearly drove him back into the elevator. "Dad." The word came out broken. A question and a prayer and an accusation all at once. David stood beside her, 29, taller than Ezekiel remembered, with the same broad shoulders and careful posture. He wore a jacket with his high school's logo on the chest. His jaw was tight, his eyes red from crying or exhaustion or both. Ezekiel stepped out of the elevator. His legs felt unsteady beneath him. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. For years of imagined conversations, for years of rehearsed apologies, and now that the moment was here, he had nothing. Rachel moved first. She crossed the lobby in 5 strides, her boots loud against the marble floor. She stopped an arm's length away from him, close enough to touch but holding herself back. Her chest heaved with rapid breaths. Tears streamed down her face. For years. Her voice shook. For years, Dad. We thought you were dead. We held a funeral. I gave a eulogy for a man I was not even sure was gone. I know. His voice came out as a rasp. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Sorry? Rachel's voice rose. You left a note. 3 sentences. You told us not to look for you. Do you have any idea what that did to us? To David? To me? Ezekiel could not meet her eyes. He stared at the floor, at the polished marble that reflected the morning light. I cannot look at you, he whispered. After she died. You have her eyes, Rachel. Every time I saw you, I saw her. And I saw my failure. Your failure? Rachel stepped closer. Dad, she had cancer. Stage 4. There was nothing anyone could do. I was not there. The words tore out of him. I was in traffic while she died alone. I chose a briefing over her deathbed. I chose duty over the only woman I ever loved. She was not alone. The voice was David's. He had not moved from where he stood, but his words carried across the lobby with quiet force. Ezekiel looked up at his son. She was not alone, Dad. David's voice cracked. Rachel and I were there. We held her hands. We told her we loved her. We told her you were coming. His son's face contorted with grief. Her last words were about you. She said, tell Zeke I understand. Tell him I always understood. Tell him to take care of our babies. The world tilted. Ezekiel's knees buckled. He would have fallen if Rachel had not caught him, her arms wrapping around him with a strength he did not expect. She understood. His voice was barely audible. She always understood. She loved you, Dad. Rachel's arms tightened. She knew who you were when she married you. She knew the sacrifices. She made peace with all of it. The only thing she could not have made peace with is this. You destroying yourself, running from the people who love you. Ezekiel clung to his daughter. The first embrace he had received in 4 years. The first human warmth that was not pity or charity. His body shook with sobs that he could not control. Then David was there too. His son's arms wrapped around both of them, forming a circle of grief and love and reunion in the middle of a hotel lobby. We never stopped looking, David said into his father's shoulder. Every lead, every rumor, every homeless veteran who matched your description. We followed them all. You should have let me go, Ezekiel managed. You should have moved on with your lives. Rachel pulled back just far enough to look into his face. Her mother's eyes, fierce and loving. You do not get to decide that, she said. You do not get to choose whether we love you. That is not how family works. She gripped his face between her hands. You taught me that. When I was 12 and I told you I hated you for missing my recital. You said love is not a choice. It is a commitment. It does not go away just because someone hurts you. Ezekiel remembered. A lifetime ago. A conversation he had forgotten until this moment. I was a hypocrite, he whispered. I said those words and then I ran from them. Yes, Rachel agreed. You were. But you are still our father. You are still the man who taught David to ride a bike and walked me down the aisle on my wedding and held Mom's hand through 3 deployments worth of goodbyes. She released his face but kept hold of his hands. We are not asking you to be perfect, Dad. We're not asking you to be the man you were before. We're just asking you to come home. To try. To let us help you the way you spend your whole life helping everyone else. Ezekiel looked at his children. At Rachel with her mother's eyes and her mother's fierce love. At David with his quiet strength and his patient heart. I do not know how to come back from this, he admitted. I do not know who I am anymore. David finally smiled. A small thing, fragile but real. Then we will figure out together, he said. That is what family does. General Okafor approached slowly, giving the reunion space. There is a program, she said gently, run by veterans, for veterans. No bureaucracy, no paperwork. Just people who understand what you have been through, helping you find your way back. Ezekiel looked at her, at the 3 stars on her shoulders, at the woman he had mentored when she was lost. Will you come? Rachel asked. Will you at least try? The old man looked at his children, at the hope in their eyes, at the love that had survived 4 years of his absence. He thought of Margaret, of her last words, "Take care of our babies." He thought of Darnell, of his final breath. "You got too much teaching left to do." He thought of every soldier he had ever trained, every life he had ever touched, every lesson he had ever given about courage and perseverance and the refusal to surrender. And finally, for the first time in 4 years, he made a choice that was not about running. "Yes," he said, "I will try." Rachel collapsed against his chest, sobbing. David's hand gripped his shoulder. And in the lobby of a Minneapolis hotel, surrounded by strangers who had become witnesses to a miracle, Colonel Ezekiel Prophet Okonkwo took the first step home. 3 months later, the Minneapolis recruiting station looked different. Not in its physical appearance, which remained the same glass storefront with the same flags and portraits. The difference was in what happened inside. A small office had been converted in the back, where filing cabinets once held recruitment quotas and administrative paperwork. There were now comfortable chairs arranged in a circle, a coffee maker that was always full, a whiteboard covered with phone numbers and resources, and on the wall, a simple sign that read, "You are not alone." Colonel Ezekiel Okonkwo sat in one of those chairs, facing a young man who had been living under an overpass for the past 8 months. The young man's name was Terrence. He was 26, 2 tours in Afghanistan. A Purple Heart he kept in his pocket because he had nowhere else to put it. "I do not know how to talk to my family," Terrence said. His hands twisted in his lap. "They look at me and they see who I was before. But that person is gone. I do not know who I am anymore." Ezekiel leaned forward. His beard was trimmed now, his hair cut short. He wore clean clothes and sat with the posture of a man who had rediscovered his spine. But his eyes still held the shadows. They always would. "I said those exact words 3 months ago," he said, "in a hotel lobby to my children who had driven through a blizzard to find me." Terrence looked up. "What did they say?" "They said we would figure it out together. That figuring it out together is what family does." "And did you figure it out?" Ezekiel considered the question. The past 3 months had not been easy. There were nights when the old darkness crept back, when the weight of Margaret's absence threatened to crush him. There were moments when he wanted to run again, to disappear into the anonymous mercy of the streets. But there were also mornings when Rachel called just to hear his voice. Evenings when David sent photographs of his students, asking his father's advice on how to reach a struggling kid. Sundays when he sat in the program circle and listened to other veterans tell their stories, and found pieces of his own story reflected back. "We are still figuring it out," he said honestly. "Some days are harder than others. But I show up. That is what I can control. I show up and I try." Terrence nodded slowly. Something in his posture eased slightly. The door to the main station opened and Diana Castellanos entered, stomping snow from her boots. She had become a regular presence here, coordinating between the VA outreach program and the veteran support circle that had grown around Ezekiel's presence. "Colonel," she said, "there is someone here to see you." Ezekiel excused himself from Terrence and walked into the main room. Staff Sergeant Tyler Brennan stood near the entrance. He was not in uniform. His civilian clothes hung loosely on a frame that had lost weight over the past months. His face was pale, his eyes uncertain. Ezekiel stopped a few feet away. The last time they had stood in this room together, Brennan had been threatening to throw him into a blizzard. "Sergeant." "Sir." Brennan's voice was barely audible. "I wanted to. I needed to." He stopped. Started again. "I am sorry." The words came out rough, unpracticed. "Why did that day? What I said. I have thought about it every day since. I was wrong. I was so wrong." Ezekiel studied the young man. The arrogance that had defined him 3 months ago was gone, replaced by something rawer, something that looked like genuine shame. "General Okafor transferred you," Ezekiel said. It was not a question. "To a veterans rehabilitation center in Texas." Brennan swallowed hard. "I spent 3 months working with soldiers who came back broken, listening to their stories, learning what they sacrificed, what they carry." His eyes glistened. "I did not understand before. I thought I knew what service meant because I wore the uniform. but I did not know anything. Ezekiel was silent for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Understanding is a process, not a destination. Someone taught me that once. Brennan stared at the offer hand. Then, slowly, he took it. I'm going to do better, sir. I swear it. I know you will. Ezekiel released his grip. That is why I asked General Okafor to send you back here. Brennan's eyes widened. You asked for me? This program needs people who understand both sides. People who have seen their own failures and learned from them. Ezekiel gestured toward the back office. We have veterans who need help reconnecting with a system that often dismisses them. You know how that system thinks. You can help us bridge the gap. Brennan looked toward the office, toward Terrence, who was watching through the doorway, toward the sign on the wall that promised no one had to be alone. I do not deserve this chance, he said quietly. Ezekiel almost smiled. None of us deserve the chances we get. That is what makes them matter. The door opened again, and Rachel entered, carrying a bag of takeout containers. She had driven up from the city for her weekly visit, a ritual that had become sacred to both of them. Dad, I brought lunch. She noticed Brennan and paused. Oh, hello. Rachel, this is Sergeant Brennan. He is going to be helping with the program. Rachel's expression flickered. She knew the story, knew what Brennan had done, but she also knew what her father was trying to build here. Welcome, she said simply. There is plenty of food if you're hungry. They ate together in the back office. Ezekiel and Rachel and Brennan and Terrence and Diana. An unlikely family formed by circumstance and choice. Outside, the winter sun reflected off snow that would melt by spring, giving way to something new. After lunch, Rachel walked her father to the window. They stood together looking out at the street where pedestrians hurried past, oblivious to what was happening inside. Mom would be proud of you, Rachel said. Ezekiel touched the chain beneath his shirt. The tags, the ring. He wore them still and always would. I talk to her sometimes, he admitted. In my head, I tell her about the program, about you and David, about the soldiers we are helping. What does she say? He smiled. A real smile, one that reached his eyes. She says, keep going. She says she always knew I had too much teaching left to do. Rachel leaned her head against his shoulder. You do, Dad. You really do. If this story touched you today, if it reminded you that it is never too late to come home, never too late to ask for help, never too late to let the people who love you back into your life, we hope you will subscribe and join us for more stories like this one. And take a moment to think about the people in your own life who might be struggling in silence. The veteran on the corner, the family member who is pulled away, the friend who stopped returning calls. Sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to give up, one hand extended in the darkness, one voice saying you're not alone. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And remember, every person you pass on the street has a story. Some of them are waiting to be found. Some of them are waiting to come home. The recruiting station hummed with quiet activity. Terrence was on the phone with his mother, tears streaming down his face as he said words he had been afraid to speak for months. Brennan was taking notes, learning the intake process, beginning a journey of his own redemption. Diana was coordinating with a VA counselor, fighting the bureaucracy on behalf of a veteran who had fallen through the cracks. And Colonel Ezekiel Prophet Okonkwo stood at the window with his daughter, watching the world go by, finally at peace. Still here, brother, he whispered to the tags against his chest. Still teaching. And somewhere, in a place beyond grief and regret, Darnell Washington smiled.